RTA basically means that you have an isolated tubular abnormality in acidification. And that is why there is issue in terms, so you need to have a metabolic acidosis, which is hyperchloremic in the sense that you have got a normal anion gap, and that is because of renal acidification. And the fourth important point is that the renal function is normal. So glomerular function is normal. So it's renal, tubular, metabolic, hyperchloremic acidosis. This is what RTA basically means. Now, RTA could be distal, as we discussed, which is a problem predominantly in the form that either you are not able to push the proton out or it back diffuses. So this is the distal RTA. It basically presents early with more severe disease, as Naveen was talking about, with more severe acidosis, nephrocalcinosis. The bony deformities will happen at a later stage in this perspective because they don't directly affect the bone, but long-term acidosis will cause rickets and bony deformities, which happens if the diagnosis is late. These individuals basically will have more likelihood of having a familial cause when we begin with, and they will have associations of both autosomal recessive and dominant inheritance, with deafness being an important phenomena. Those who have a first-time presentation will basically present with either a structural abnormality in the kidneys or in the setting of an autoimmune disorder like systemic lupus or Sjogren's syndrome will be the most likely thing. Very importantly, if you have an acute presentation with hypokalemic paralysis, you are possibly dealing with distal RTA. Potassium will improve once you give treatment with bicarbonate. Now, proximal RTA is basically a problem in which you are losing a lot of bicarb. And once your bicarb levels become below a particular level, it will stabilize, and that is not going to cause further. So it's a self-limiting metabolic acidosis. Because your bicarb is not being lost anymore, your urine will become acidic in that setting. You will also be losing other elements which are there in the proximal tubule like phosphorus, glucose, amino acid. So you will have much more hypophosphatemia, causing rickets and bony deformity at an early stage. It is usually combined with other disorders like cystinosis and tyrosinemia. Rarely they can be isolated forms, and acquired forms also happen in a syndromic picture in that regard. Hyperkalemic RTA is an entirely different picture. This is basically a problem of either the epithelial sodium chloride channel or in the setting of a mineralocorticoid effect that we discuss in that setting. So in this perspective of RTA, what we'll discuss today is first to confirm RTA. We have done it a bit last time. We'll re-emphasize today again. Second, whether it's proximal or distal. And finally, what is the cause? So as Naveen was saying, you should consider RTA in anybody who is failing to grow less than 3 years of age. So all these children should have their routine blood gas, which is done. Rickets, which patient with rickets will you do blood gas, Manoj?
With vitamin D resistant.
So refractory rickets and low phosphorus. Refractory rickets with low normal phosphorus, the next investigation is a blood gas. So that you have to do. Any child failing to thrive less than 3 years of age, you have to do. Renal calcification, as I said, of course, blood gas becomes important. Along with periodic paralysis because of hypokalemia, you have to look at blood gas and polyuria, and as well as if there is acidotic breathing, you will consider. But major presentation which we will see will either be nephrocalcinosis, growth failure, or polyuria. They will be the major presentation. Rare acute presentation that we have seen is more in the terms of distal RTA in that perspective, which is there in that regards. So we have discussed the term itself, like we say diabetic ketoacidosis. So diabetes, ketosis, acidosis. Here also it's very, very self-explanatory. It has to be renal in origin, but tubular, not glomerular, and you need to have acidosis. So what you need is that there is acidosis, pH is below 7.2, and it has to be metabolic. Which is the best marker of metabolic acidosis, Dr. Pratik? What exactly is the base excess? What does it mean actually?
So basically, it is the excess of, is the loss of base, the difference between acid and base.
So it means base excess is a simple term. How much that the blood has excess amount of base? So how much acid you would need to add to neutralize it? So when your base excess is negative, it would mean that you would not need any acid. You already are more acidic. So if your base excess is less than -5, it means there is metabolic acidosis. What is standard base excess? SBE. and standard bicarb. So why don't we use bicarb? Why do we use the base excess? Bicarb is a marker. Don't you think bicarb is a good marker?
But the thing is that in case of distal, bicarb
No. Bicarb is a marker of metabolic acidosis. That is different. Distal proximal is fine. What I'm trying to say is that why do we prefer SBE or standard base excess over bicarbonate as a marker of metabolic acidosis?
Because it will change by PCO2.
So you need to then correct it for CO2. So either you use standardized bicarbonate or standard bicarb, which is corrected for the level of CO2, or you use SBE, which is a base excess, which is again corrected for CO2, which gives you a good marker. So don't go too much into bicarb unless you correct it for CO2. Otherwise, simply look at base excess. Base excess less than -5 is significant. Less than -2, less than -10 definitely mean that there is acidosis. So first you have to prove that there is acidosis, which is metabolic. The next component is to prove that this is hyperchloremic, and we'll discuss again briefly about anion gap. It has to be normal in that setting. You need to show that the glomerular function is normal, so your creatinine has to be normal, and that your acidification is defective, so ammonium production is defective. So to prove that somebody has renal tubular acidosis, you have to show that there is acidosis, which is metabolic in origin, with normal anion gap, normal creatinine, and impaired ammonium production. This is what RTA is. And before you do that, you should not label anybody as RTA. I've seen patients with organic acidemias in which anion gap was not done and they were labeled as RTA. I've seen patients with diarrhea who have been labeled as RTA because proper workup was not done. So because RTA is a rare situation, requires lifelong treatment, you should be careful in terms of making the right diagnosis at the right time. So this is important. So what really is anion gap? Naveen, what do you understand by anion gap?
So it is basically non-negative ions which are actually non.
So it is a measure of
unmeasured
negative ions. So basically, as we discussed outside, that in the body, and if you look at this sort of a structure, what do you see? There are three major measured ions which are there in the blood, which are sodium, chloride, and bicarbonate. So what do you see in that? Positive ones are more or negative ones are more? So sodium is always more than chloride and bicarbonate. Now, you can't have a system which is basically having a positive ion. It has to be a neutral one. So which means that there is an unmeasured ion which are circulating in the body, which is ensuring the neutrality. So anion gap in a simple term is that negative ion which you are not measuring. So unmeasured anion is a marker of the anion gap. So these are the measured and the negative ones, which are usually in the form of protein, HPO4, H2PO4, a lot of other combinations, albumin, negative albumin, and all those things will be the anion gap. And this is what we're talking about. So it is the unmeasured negative ion. Now, how do you get that figure, Manoj? Because how do you know unmeasured? You're not measuring. So how do you know? So what will be a simple way of getting the anion gap?
I think the difference of the positive, measured.
So measured positive minus measured negative. Positive means what? Cation or anion? Cation. So measured cation minus measured anion is the anion gap. If you talk about the actual formula is the other way around. It is the unmeasured anion minus unmeasured cation. But it's ridiculous. How will you do it's taking your ear from the other side. So to make it simple, you see the measured positive and the measured negative. So it's sodium minus chloride minus bicarbonate. Now, why don't we use potassium? Some people used to use potassium earlier.
Potassium is intracellular.
So there is only 4 millimoles. So you can then talk about calcium, then you talk about magnesium, then it becomes too difficult. Sodium is very easy to do. Chloride, often when you're measuring sodium, chloride will come also, and bicarb. So only 3 ions are considered to be significant. Potassium only 4, calcium 1.5 to 2, magnesium or even less. So they are not much significant, but they will have implications which will happen. So if you consider now, so anion gap is basically the unmeasured negative ion. This is what I said. If you want to measure it, you can either measure the unmeasured negative and unmeasured positive. The difference between the two will be the anion gap. But that, of course, is not practical. So what you do is that you subtract bicarbonate and chloride from sodium and you will get the anion gap. Now, what will happen to anion gap, Naveen, in somebody who has hyperkalemia? If your measured positive ion goes up, what will happen to the anion gap? So if your potassium goes up and you're not taking potassium in that consideration, it will go down because it has to be neutralized. So of course, your sodium plus potassium will be the same, but potassium is high. You will basically get more chloride will come in to compensate that, and anion gap may become less. Can you think of a situation wherein you can actually have a negative anion gap? Is it possible? If you have some positive ion which is in a huge amount, then basically what will happen is that your chloride plus bicarbonate will be more than sodium. But can it be hypercalcemia? Impossible, because if your calcium is like 20, you will not be surviving. If you think of hyperkalemia, again, not possible. So can there be a condition in which you can have a negative anion gap? What will happen in DI? Which positive ion can get accumulated in the body without being lethal? See, when your negative ion accumulate like lactate, organic acid, your anion gap becomes more. When your positive ion accumulate, it will become less. But can it be negative? So this was a very interesting case whom I saw, was basically a child who actually presented with recurrent episodes of dehydration, acidotic breathing, and altered sensorium. And in that setting, we did the workup, we found there was acidosis, but the anion gap was negative. In the sense, the chloride was hugely high, and chloride plus bicarbonate was more than sodium. And the child used to be there for a couple of days in the hospital and then gets discharged and become better. We always found that at the time of admission, his levels of urea were very high and then they became normal. So ultimately, what was the final hypothesis when this was what we published in archives maybe around 20 years ago, was a possibility of ammonium chloride as a toxic agent being given to that patient. And that's why you have NH4 plus. So if your NH4 plus becomes very high, you will have a low, and this was in fact a negative anion gap. And within 48 hours of admission, the child used to be fine. And this happened 2-3 times. So this is what we suspected as ammonium chloride poisoning as a possibility in that setting. So this is a rare situation in which you can actually have a negative anion gap. So if you have increased unmeasured anion, lactate, pyruvate, ketoacidosis, anything organic acidemia, anion gap will increase. If you have hyperkalemia, hypercalcemia, hypermagnesemia, it will be slightly low, but that will not be very significant because how much potassium will go up. So suppose your potassium becomes from 4 to 8, your anion gap will become 6. So that can happen, but that will not be because patient will be much more sicker because of those factors. So in this perspective, normal anion gap is 10 to 12 millimoles per liter. Now, what will happen if you have accumulation of organic acids, Manoj? We just discussed if you've got more organic acids like lactate, ketone, organic acids, your anion gap will become more because your unmeasured ion will increase, but chloride and bicarbonate will remain the same. So effectively, the difference between sodium chloride and bicarbonate will increase. So any condition in which you've got organic acids accumulating, you will have increase in anion gap. What will happen if you have a bicarbonate loss? It will remain normal. So what will happen if you lose bicarbonate? Bicarbonate will become less. Then how will it remain normal? So you have to compensate by increasing chloride. So you will have hyperchloremic metabolic acidosis. This is what RTA is in that perspective. So anion gap will be unchanged or normal in that perspective. If you're gaining protons, what will happen, Naveen? So basically, if you gain HCl, your chloride will increase, bicarbonate will come down, but effectively your anion gap will become normal. So essentially, normal anion gap means that the problem is either in chloride or bicarbonate. Increase anion gap means that there is some other negative ion which is coming, which is causing this issue in that setting. So anion gap helps you a lot in distinguishing between a proximal and in between RTA versus other causes of metabolic acidosis. So in metabolic acidosis, if you have accumulation of organic acid, your anion gap will increase. This is what we already discussed. If you have an issue of loss of bicarbonate, which is proximal RTA, or gain of proton, which is distal RTA, you will have an anion gap which will be normal in that setting. What will happen in diarrhea, Dr. Pratik?
So in diarrhea, we will lose bicarbonate. So if we are losing bicarbonate, the anion gap will increase.
And chloride will go. So ultimately it will be normal. So the only two major causes of metabolic acidosis with normal anion gap are diarrhea versus RTA. So next step will be how do we distinguish between the two in that setting. So now just to summarize, 12-month-old girl failure to thrive, we discussed this last time as well. There is metabolic acidosis and what we do is anion gap. So what we see here is that sodium is 144 while there is a big anion gap which is there. So anion gap in this setting is around 22. So what do you think in this regards? Is it a possibility that this is basically a RTA? No, it is a high anion gap. So you have to think of other possibility. Organic acidemias would be a likely diagnosis. Next, we have already discussed that you have proven acidosis, metabolic. You said that this is anion gap is normal, but there can be other possibilities as well. So this is a case I always mention because this was a girl with failure to thrive. Somebody had done a blood gas which showed that there is a metabolic acidosis with a pH which is alkaline, which theoretically would mean that there is a problem in distal acidification, quote unquote, distal RTA. But when we did further workup, we found that the phosphorus levels were very high and this turned out to be a chronic kidney disease. So always remember that if you have a combined glomerular and tubular defect, they will behave like distal RTA only. So in that setting, you have to show a normal creatinine before you make any workup or evaluation in that perspective, and creatinine was high. So again, renal functions have to be assessed before making a diagnosis. Now you want to distinguish between the gastrointestinal loss versus renal tubular loss. How do you distinguish between the two?
So we need to look in for the urinary iron loss. Case for GA loss, there will be the NH4 cell production will be normal. Whereas in case of the renal tubular loss, that will be defective. So in that case, we can be able to make out the result of renal urinary iron.
So till now you have proven that there is acidosis, there is metabolic acidosis. You have shown that there is no accumulation of other negative acids. So this is like a normal anion gap setting. Renal function is normal. Now the question is diarrhea versus renal tubular acidosis. In diarrhea, the body should produce normally, try to excrete this amount by producing more ammonium. So NH4 plus, not ammonia. So of course, ammonia will get converted into NH4, but the urine loss will be NH4 plus. If you have a primary problem, so anybody who has got metabolic acidosis should have an increased ammonium production, unless there is a defect. So very simple, diarrhea, they will also increase production and your ammonium NH4 plus level should be high in the urine, but they will not be high in the setting of RT. So the best test to distinguish between diarrhea versus renal tubular acidosis is to look at renal ammonium production. And how do you measure that?
So the same thing, sir. The thing is that instead of the potassium, which is not used in case of blood aneurysm, you have to use potassium here. And here bicarbonate is not.
So ammonium is basically an unmeasured positive ion. So you can either use a urinary anion gap or a urinary osmolar gap. It's also osmol. You're not measuring it. So what they're trying to say is that this is your unmeasured positive ion. So you look at urinary anion gap, you will know if it is high, it would mean that ammonium production may have a problem. If it is negative, it means the ammonium production is good. So we'll first talk about urinary anion gap. Again, unmeasured positive, unmeasured negative. We already discussed about that. And as Naveen was saying that here we do not take bicarbonate. We only take chloride as a negative ion because bicarbonate, theoretically, we discussed 99% of bicarbonate should be absorbed. Fe bicarb in a normal situation should be less than 1%. So bicarb is of no value. Potassium is important because how do you calculate sodium? When we talk about osmolality, we say you make it sodium plus potassium into 2. Effectively, sodium and potassium in urine are same. So that's why potassium becomes important. Sodium plus potassium minus chloride will be the formula in this setting. Of course, ketones will cause a confusion in that perspective, and they will increase the unmeasured anion gap which will be there. So anybody who has got a metabolic acidosis should have increased ammonium production. And if ammonium production is more, you will expect that the chloride level will be more than sodium and potassium, and your anion gap will be negative. So if you have a negative anion gap, it means a negative urinary anion gap, which basically means ammonium. As I said, so if you now remember what I was discussing, that when your blood anion gap was negative also, we considered ammonium as a possible thing, because ammonium can do that. Same thing happens here. In urine, if your ammonium is more, anion gap will become negative. While if you have a abnormal response, this will not happen, and your urinary anion gap will always be positive in that perspective. So in RTA, ammonium production is not going to be there. So your urinary anion gap will be positive more than 20. Less than minus 20 would mean that there is a renal cause in that perspective. So just to summarize RTA versus diarrhea, in diarrhea, there is increased ammonium production and you have got a negative anion gap which will happen less than minus 20. In RTA, the ammonium production is impaired. So anion gap in that setting will basically be a positive one, and that's how you distinguish. So this becomes important. Now, there are certain issues which happen, particularly like ketosis and other situations where this urinary anion gap is not very effective. Any other cause of, let's say you have got an organic acid going in the urine, that is going to cause a huge confusion in your assessment. So this should be done only once you have proven that there is a hyperchloremic metabolic acidosis. Suppose you have DKA, what will happen to urinary anion gap? So that will cause a confusion. So again, so if you have organic acidemia, any cause which is lost in the urine again will cause a confusion. Urinary anion gap will become positive in that perspective. So that is not something you want to do. So only once you have proven that this is hyperchloremic, then you do a urinary anion gap. Now, the other way to look at is the osmolality. So we look into what is the actual urinary osmolality, and you subtract the calculated urinary osmolality. So of course, this is what the urinary osmolality should be. This is what it is, means that if this is much more, there is something else which is going on, which is causing this increased urinary osmolality. And usually this something is ammonium. So if there is a huge difference between your actual minus calculated osmolality, it means ammonium is more. So this is a marker of osmolar gap. The problem may happen if you have a urease producing infection, your ammonium level will become high, and that may cause a problem in that perspective. So in gastrointestinal loss, what will happen to urinary osmolar gap? Will it increase or decrease? Naveen? Because your ammonia is more, and that's why you will get a increased amount of urinary osmolar gap which will happen. So your osmolar gap will increase, which will indicate that this is more like a GI loss. What happens in RTA? It will be decreased because you don't have a production, so it will be normal or whatever. It's less than 150 in the normal situation. That's what it will be like that in that perspective. So 2-month-old boy with failure to thrive in diarrhea, you have got metabolic acidosis, which is there, and you see anion gap is normal. Now diarrhea versus RTA, urinary anion gap, this is the reading. So diagnosis. So this is clearly more in favor of a increased ammonium production, excludes RTA, goes more in favor of a normal situation of a diarrhea in that setting will be the most likely situation in that perspective. So we have discussed a bit about confirmation. There are a couple of questions we'll take now before we go ahead in terms of subsequent aspects. So there are 2 questions which are there. Is urinary anion gap same in proximal and distal RTA? Yes. So there was a lot of debate about what should be the urinary anion gap in that, but studies have shown that it's a good marker, that it is definitely positive in both proximal and distal RTA. So it's a overall defect which is there in that regards. And this is also related to the bicarbonate loss, which happens in the setting of proximal RTA, which will basically make it. So if you're losing bicarbonate, what will happen? You're not measuring bicarbonate. So it's an unmeasured negative ion. So your urinary anion gap will also increase. It will become positive. So again, it is always positive. So it's a good marker even for a proximal RTA in that perspective. So now the second big question which comes in your mind is, what is the type of RTA? So I've already said, if you have very early onset with hypokalemia, severe failure to thrive, nephrocalcinosis, this is distal RTA. Early onset, polyuria, rickets, but no hypokalemia, other features, hepatomegaly, corneal crystals, other parameters, you start thinking of a proximal RTA, mildish disease. Later onset, severe acidosis. Along with that, you've got fractures, pathological fracture. This is distal RTA. This is the third presentation that we commonly see. Patient coming to you with recurrent nephrocalcinosis, mildest sort of acidosis, that is sort of an incomplete distal RTA or a milder form of distal RTA. Patient coming at a later age with hypokalemic paralysis and their acidosis is there. This looks like an acquired. So this is an autoimmune cause of distal RTA. So very early onset, severe form is inherited form of RTA. Look for deafness, distal RTA. Earlier onset with rickets, predominantly mild acidosis. This is cystinosis, tyrosinemia, all those things, proximal RTA. Severe fracture, pathological fractures with very, very failure to thrive, that is distal RTA. And older onset with hypokalemic paralysis, think of autoimmune Sjogren syndrome. So you've seen all these manifestations which have been presenting to us. So clinical picture will tell you, but of course we have to distinguish between proximal and distal. So what would be the other major differentiating features, Manoj, between proximal and distal RTA?
First, the fractionated bicarbonate level after correction of the acidosis, then urinary pH level.
So urinary pH will be what?
Urinary pH will be acidic in the proximal RTA. The acidification is intact. In this place is alkaline.
Then?
And other by the urinary micro, you can see phosphatemia,
So what you're trying to say is that first of all, the severity of acidosis very much is distal RTA. Second, increased bicarbonate excretion after you have corrected acidosis, that will be proximal RTA. You said that there is a acidic urine during RTA, that is proximal RTA. Then there is another measure of acidification which is there, which is the urinary to blood carbon dioxide difference, which is again compromised in distal RTA. So these all parameters will help you distinguish. And of course, if you have nephrocalcinosis, that will go more in favor of a distal RTA in that setting. So urinary pH is a good marker. Anybody who is acidotic should have an acidic urine. Blood acidic, urine should be acidic. If your urine is not acidic, that becomes a problem. Now, when we say acidic, we are not using that parameter of 7 as a cutoff. So if you use 7, that becomes different because urine typically is also on a acidic side most of the cases. So we are talking about a cutoff of 5.5 and some people use 5.3 as a cutoff. So in metabolic acidosis, your urinary pH should be less than 5.3 unless there is an acidification defect. So if your urinary pH is more than 5.3, it excludes proximal RTA. Let's put it this way. And less than 5.3 would suggest proximal RTA. Now, when should the pH be done? After correction of acidosis or at the time of acidosis? Very important. Bicarb should be measured after you have corrected, but this should be done during acidosis. So this is a very easy test. When you have acidosis, just look at urine pH. You will get the diagnosis at that perspective immediately. Now, if you have infection, what will happen, Dr. Pratik? Infection, what will it do to urine pH? So if you have a urease producing infection, that will produce more ammonia and that may cause a problem. That may actually give you a false reading of urine pH. So whenever you do a urine pH, always look for urinary tract infection. If you have a UTI, this is of no reliability in that perspective. And if you have dehydration again, there will be a problem, because then your urinary sodium will be extracted, and that will cause a lot of confusions, and acidification become defective, because then your aldosterone starts acting. How does dehydration impact the acidification process? Naveen. Because you are taking off sodium, there is not much sodium to really exchange, because you need sodium to get out, then only you will push off your protons. So again, this acidification becomes difficult. So two situations where urine pH is unreliable is infection and dehydration. This is very, very important to remember. So what you need to do is that you need to exclude a UTI, and you need to show that urinary sodium is more than 20. Then only you should do a urinary pH. Now, fractional excretion of bicarb is very simple. In principle, this is urinary bicarbonate upon serum bicarbonate into plasma creatinine upon urinary creatinine into 100. This is what we use for FeNA, FePO4 or whatever. This is a typical formula for fractional excretion. So very important, however, is that you should not be acidotic. Why do you want to correct acidosis here?
Because if we have patients having acidosis, that time bicarbonate is always less.
So already there is not much filtered. So you will not get that. So as we said, that is what happens. If you have proximal RTA, once your bicarb becomes a particular level below, it is not reliable. So if you actually do not correct your acidosis, it will not be a reliable parameter to go, and bicarb should be more than 20. So only if you have loaded with sodium bicarbonate, then you do this perspective in that regards. So what you do urine and blood CO2 and urine and blood creatinine. The standard formula is there. As we discussed, urinary bicarb upon blood bicarb into plasma creatinine upon urinary creatinine into 100. That is in terms of percentage. What is the normal Fe bicarb, Dr. Pratik? Generally, it's very low. As I said, 99% of bicarbonate should be absorbed. So less than 1%. If it is more than 15% or 10%, that becomes very, very significant. So distal, it is usually less than 1%, but up to 5% you can consider, and proximal usually more than 10%. But if somebody is more than 5%, I would say this is inappropriate. It is definitely high. So think more of a proximal. Remember, there are some mixed form of RTAs in which you can have a confusion, especially if there is a carbonic anhydrase defect. As we discussed last time also, you can have this mixed picture. You will have features of distal RTA with bicarbonate urea. So that will be a confusion which is there. Now, we have discussed that you look at the urinary pH. If the urinary pH is high, Fe bicarb is low, that's usually distal. The best marker of distal RTA is the urine to blood carbon dioxide difference. So what does it mean basically? This much is the carbon dioxide in the blood and this much is in the urine. So what it tells you, how much your body is good in terms of excreting. CO2 basically gets converted into H2CO3, and that is carbonic acid. So it is a way of telling that if your urinary CO2 is low, it would basically mean what? You're not acidifying much. So there's a gradient which is being used in that perspective. A bit like transtubular potassium gradient, in which you correct the potassium which is there outside the lumen and the tubular lumen. Then you say how much potassium you can push. Similarly, this much is your acid in the blood. This much is your acid in the urine. If the difference is not there, it means you're not able to create much in that perspective. So in metabolic acidosis, you expect that the urine to blood CO2 difference should be there. If it is low, it means you're not able to really concentrate. Remember, I said that the proton potassium ATPase and the proton ATPase create a gradient of 1 into 250. So your acidification is very, very effective. That is why your CO2 should be much more. Then only you will going to lose the CO2. So if it is normal, that is proximal. If it is low, this is distal in that perspective. So just to summarize, if you have a mildish acidosis with low potassium, a urinary pH which is in the acidic range, a normal or slightly high urinary calcium, a high fractional excretion of bicarbonate, and a urine to blood CO2 difference, which is more in the setting going towards normal range, that is proximal RTA. If you have severe acidosis with hypokalemia, with a urinary pH which is in the more than 5.3, 5.5 range, with a hypercalciuria nephrocalcinosis, low fractional excretion of bicarbonate, and ammonium production which is defective, that is a very, very classical setting of a distal RTA. Type 4, we are not wasting too much time because that's a very mild form of acidosis. The major presentation is with hyperkalemia, hyponatremia, and acidosis is a secondary phenomenon. Why does hyperkalemia cause acidosis, Dr. Naveen?
Basically because of the distal mechanism which is based on the ENaC channel, and there is an exchange of who has to maintain the electropositivity.
So if you have hyperkalemia, body will like to push your potassium into the lumen. Now this potassium has to compete with the proton. So what potassium does, it inhibits ammonium production. So your NH3 production becomes defective, so NH4 plus is not secreted. So if you have hyperkalemia, you will not be able to excrete your proton, and that is going to cause this mild acidosis. So that is a very, very simple thing. So as I said, bicarb is 70 to 20. So even if you look at the child, look at the potassium level, look at the bicarb, you will know this is not a hyperkalemic RTA. That will present more with failure to thrive, polyuria, other presentations like pseudohypoaldosteronism, that you know the clinical picture will be quite distinct in that setting. So just to summarize, if you have a child who has metabolic acidosis, the first thing is to look at anion gap. If anion gap is high, then look at other causes of hyperchloremic metabolic acidosis. Most common cause is DKA, look at blood sugar, and then lactate, organic acid, that's a different workup altogether. If anion gap is normal, look at urinary anion gap in that setting or a urinary osmolar gap. If your urinary anion gap is negative, which means that there is a normal ammonium production, that is more like a GI loss. While if it is positive, then you're thinking of more of a RTA. In RTA, look at potassium. If your potassium is high, that is type 4. Again, very easy to diagnose. If you have a normal anion gap, a positive urinary anion gap, and a low or normal potassium, it is either proximal or distal, then look at urinary pH, look at fractional excretion of bicarbonate and urine to blood CO2 difference. These three will tell you a picture, and you will know how to go for in that perspective. If the pH is less than 5.3, that is proximal. More than 5.3, it is distal. It is the easiest to do because during acidosis, you do that. Otherwise, you have to do a soda bicarbonate loading. Now, at this point, if I do an ultrasound and find that there is nephrocalcinosis, I think it will not be much of a confusion. I won't like to do too many other things here. It's classically distal RTA. Now, some people often get confused that if you have hyperparathyroidism and you develop nephrocalcinosis, nephrocalcinosis is the cause of distal RTA. Nephrocalcinosis itself can cause distal RTA. So how do you know which is primary? Is it nephrocalcinosis causing distal RTA or distal RTA causing nephrocalcinosis? Dr. Pratik. So if you have nephrocalcinosis causing RTA, it will be mild. If you have RTA causing nephrocalcinosis, it will be severe. So as we were discussing in that case, in which you had hypocalcemia, low PTH, and low magnesium, we were saying whether it is hypoparathyroidism causing hypomagnesemia, it is hypomagnesemia causing hypoparathyroidism. So I simply said that if you have hypoparathyroidism, your magnesium will be mildly low. But if hypomagnesemia is causing hypoparathyroidism, it will be really low. So that child's magnesium was very, very low, 0.2, 0.3, something like that. So same thing here. If you have a base excess of minus 20, 25, and you got some nephrocalcinosis, it is the RTA which is the primary problem. If you have nephrocalcinosis and you got minus 7, minus 8, that minus 7, 8 is not causing nephrocalcinosis, it is the other way around. So the clinical picture will tell you. And of course, you should do the calcium level, which will tell you whether there is hypercalcemia or not. So I think if you understand this slide, majority of other features will be covered from that perspective. So 3-year-old failure to thrive with failure to thrive, potassium is 2.4. Manoj, there is metabolic acidosis that you are seeing. And what will you do now?
So,
so you have to do an anion gap, which was normal. So then you look at this is the anion gap is 12. Urinary anion gap is plus 20. What does it mean? Looks like RTA. So GI loss is out. Now, what do you think based upon these findings? What does it look? Does it look like proximal or distal? If before we go ahead.
Potassium is low and there is severe acidosis.
So untreated hypokalemia will suggest distal artery. So now you have to look at urinary pH. That will give you a better picture. Urine pH is 7.5. So this is
distal.
Anything else? Which two conditions can negatively affect your urinary pH? So infection and dehydration. Because if your urinary sodium delivery is less, you will not be able to acidify. So let's go one by one. So Fe bicarb was found to be 20% once you correct it. So you have got a discrepant result. You have got on one hand, bicarb is being lost a lot, but still this urinary pH was not very much distinct. So what do you think is happening? So you have to think of something else which is explaining the overall picture. So now this is a problem. So often it is very easy that you look at these three things. This is distal, this is proximal, but often you get these confusing pictures. So the problem here was that he had UTI. And because of that UTI, you had got a falsely alkaline urine. While it was actually more of a proximal RTA. The acidosis is not that severe, 16. Yes, potassium is low, maybe some whatever cause is there. So it's a confusing picture. But so don't just rely on this single urinary pH, especially you also look at urinary sodium as well as urinary routine microscopy. And this UTI was causing a confusion in that setting. Now, 12-year-old boy, a girl with multiple fractures, and you can see severe bony deformities. Actually, when she was referred to us, she was labeled as osteogenesis imperfecta. But when we looked at the metabolic picture, it was classically that this was more like a metabolic bone disease rather than a OI in that perspective. Failure to thrive polyuria myopathy. There is metabolic acidosis. There is hypokalemia. So your clinical diagnosis before we go ahead anywhere else. What do you think? This classically will fit into a distal RTA, of course. But let's go. Anion gap in this setting was negative, normal. So this is a RTA basically. Urinary anion gap was positive. Again goes in favor of RTA. Potassium is low. Urinary pH is 5.8, which is going to suggest distal RTA. But there was aminoaciduria, which will go more in favor of a proximal RTA. So as we discussed in that case, because of a urinary infection, there was a false diagnosis of distal RTA. Now this aminoaciduria, what do you think is happening? Is it proximal or is it distal? Or distal can cause aminoaciduria? So what first thing to remember, what is more important, urinary pH or aminoaciduria? Urinary pH. If you don't have any infection, if your sodium is normal, then urinary pH is a more solid parameter. Now, you should remember that if you have a long-standing bony disease, you will have elution of calcium, you will have hypocalcemia, you will have hyperparathyroidism, and hyperparathyroidism causes a Fanconi-like picture. We saw that case also recently. So this girl with long-standing, and if I don't look at any investigation, I'll say this is distal RTA. She has secondary hyperparathyroidism, and that secondary hyperparathyroidism is causing this Fanconi-like picture, causing aminoaciduria. So don't get too much confused. Look at your picture. What is the clinical presentation? And then you will understand. And then you have to explain. There may be some confusions which are there in that setting. So this was classically a distal RTA, not a proximal RTA. A proximal RTA will not cause this fracture at this age. It will cause bony deformity 2 years, 3 years. You will identify that time. You can't, like that girl who presented to us recently from Prayagraj, who had the same typical presentation. It can't have wait for that much time. 4-year-old boy with rickets, Dr. Pratik, calcium is 8.2, potassium is 3.8. So there is hypocalcemia, mildly lowish potassium. Phosphorus is low, ALP is high. There is base excess of minus 6.5, anion gap is normal. So this is RTA. There's mild acidosis. So do you think this rickets is because of this? He was referred to us as RTA. Okay, so urinary anion gap was positive, potassium was low normal.
It could be because it is proximal.
And urinary pH is 5.6. Labeled as distal RTA. Do you agree?
So I think this is secondary to
Very important. And this was a case which we actually discussed as a full presentation also of secondary hyperparathyroidism, which caused this problem. So what you need to understand is that if you have secondary hyperparathyroidism, it will cause a mild RTA. And this is very, very common in vitamin D deficiency. Don't label everybody with RTA because you need to have refractory rickets. That was the first point we said. Refractory rickets with low phosphorus. Then you start working. So this vitamin D was very low, PTH was high. So this is secondary hyperparathyroidism. So we have seen 3 cases in which there was a confusion in terms of arriving the diagnosis just because of, and if you use a proper assessment, you will make the diagnosis in that perspective. So we've not discussed about confirmation of RTA, classification. The next is cause. So for cause, look at drug history. This is rare, but acute drug history, especially amphotericin B. We saw that elderly patient who had hypomagnesemia and hypokalemia tubulopathy because of amphotericin B. Again, very common. Topiramate. This is a long-standing drug, especially with antiepileptic, can cause a RTA-like picture. Diamox, of course, but you will know if somebody is on Diamox, that will cause the same picture. Then, if you look at the eyes, what are you looking at the eyes? Naveen? For corneal crystals. Cystinosis is one condition which is often missed. So if you're thinking of proximal RTA, not very easy to diagnose. Your atherosclerosis will be mild. So try to look at other clues as well. Eye examination, ophthalmology referral, and you may get a clue. Wilson's may also have the KF ring. Jogren will say that eyes is dry. That lady whom we diagnose, these things will give you the diagnosis. Hearing defect, more in terms of a distal RTA, which will tell you a liver involvement. So if you have a liver disease with rickets, what do you think is the cause? So if you have a liver disease, if you have a renal failure with rickets, renal failure is the cause. No. Renal failure may cause rickets, of course. No? Any cause of glomerular disease will cause this thing. But if you have a liver disease, it is not going to cause rickets. Why?
Because the liver has a large amount of vitamin D.
Vitamin D? 25 hydroxylase. So even if your liver is totally gone, you will not develop rickets. If you have a chronic liver disease patient presenting to you with rickets, as you said rightly, it is tyrosinemia, cystinosis, or malabsorption. It is not because of liver disease per se in that setting. So this is important from that. Now, further workup for distal RTA, do an ultrasound. Of course, you look at nephrocalcinosis, other malformations. Autoimmune panel becomes important for Jogren and SLE. Proximal RTA, look for cystinosis, Wilson's disease. Type 4 RTA, the workup is like complete. We've got a whole panel for the impaired aldosterone effect. So you look at renin, aldosterone, cortisol, all that workup will go. Sodium-mediated calcium transport, how it occurs. So basically, if you have got more sodium delivery in the tubule, Dr. Pankaj, you will require this calcium excretion to happen. So if you've got more sodium delivery, you will lose more potassium, more magnesium, more calcium. Because the sodium is a positive one. It goes out. Once it goes out, chloride also comes out, but chloride is slow to move. So you will have an electronegative environment which is created in the lumen, and that electronegative environment will drag out all your substances like potassium, like calcium. So if you have increased sodium delivery, you will have hypercalciuria. That's a major point. Dr. Pradeep is asking, is excretion of citrate in proximal RTA as a part of disease which actually prevents nephrocalcinosis? Yes, so this is part of a tubular dysfunction. So this is sort of a problem. The tubule is not even absorbing citrate, and that prevents nephrocalcinosis. Dr. Pankaj is asking citrate versus bicarbonate. So I think that is not a big issue. Often we use both interchangeably because citrate itself gets converted into bicarbonate ultimately. But with soda bicarbonate tablet available, certain situations will prefer that. If somebody has established nephrocalcinosis and you have a hypercalciuria risk, maybe sodium potassium citrate may be a better solution. Or sometimes you actually use portrate also. So portrate only contains potassium. So that is something which will help out in that regard. How to calculate bicarb per ml? Usually 1 ml has got 2 millimoles in most of these preparations, be it bicitra, portrate, or polycitra. So 1 ml is like 2 millimoles. Nodosis syrup is also available in that perspective. Let's see if there's a Q&A. How to do urine pH same as blood? Yes, so it can be done in the same machine. You can use the same machine to get the urinary pH. The strips which are used for urine pH are not very reliable. but that could be the other option. But best would be to do the urinary pH in the same machine.